Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York jazz singer Vicki Burns. She opens up about COVID living, her road in jazz, and the brand new 2022 CD Lotus Blossom Days. She has been delighting audiences for years with her impeccable taste, sense of rhythm, and tone. Legendary jazz drummer Max Roach once described Vicki's singing as a gold mine. She has a long, rich road in the craft. Enjoy the story.
Joe Domino, Neon Jazz Radio.
Hi, Joe. Nice to meet you over the phone.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thanks for taking a minute out today.
Oh, absolutely.
So before we get into Blossom Days, I kind of want to cover a little bit of, what the elephant in the room for the world, which has been COVID. We're coming out of this, and I'm curious, as an artist, how did you survive throughout this time, this last 2 years?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So
yeah.
How did I survive COVID? Here I was in New York. Everything just shut down, like tighter than it was crazy, and everybody lost work, and it was very frightening for a few weeks. And then a really good friend of mine, who's actually she's one of the people who I used her work actually on Lotus Blossom Days. Tessa Suter, wrote a beautiful song, "You Don't Have to Believe." And I did her song on the album, and we were talking one day, and she said, darling, because she's from England, she said, you should sign up for unemployment. All my friends are doing it, and they're getting more money than they've ever had in their lives. So that's what I did. I signed up for unemployment, and, thank goodness. And I socked that money away, and that's the money that I'm using right now to help to put out my album. So I had it, for the most part, already recorded in January of 2020, and wanted to do a few vocal fixes and things, in the early part of 2020. But then, of course, COVID hit, and like everything completely shut down. So it really delayed my project by quite a long time. And then in 2021, my mom had some surgery. So I went to be with her in Maine to kind of help her get through the recovery process. So there was another almost whole year. But while I was in Maine, I was able to work remotely with my wonderful engineer, Tyler McDermott. And I was able to work remotely with my wonderful arranger, Sam Bevan, who also arranged all of the horns, and everybody did all of their parts remotely. And he was able to mix the horns, and then I was able to get it to Dave Darlington, who then mastered it. All of that stuff was completely done remotely, which was amazing to me. So we were able to really finish the project in 2021, and then I tried to get certain things pulled together for the promotion part of it. I had to wait 3 months. Please don't let anybody know about this, because I love my liner notes. My liner notes, I think, are wonderful. But I had to wait a really long time for the liner notes, and I really wanted this particular person to write them. So I kind of waited. And so all of those things really sort of, delayed my project finally coming out. I was supposed to release it in March, and now, of course, it's July. But it's happening, so that's the most important thing.
What do you hope the listener gets from the brand new album? What do you want them to get from it?
Oh, I wanted to get a little bit of a taste of, a straight ahead approach to songs that, haven't been recorded very much by a vocalist. So I'm not really that instrumentally oriented in terms of my own interpretation, although I do scat, of course. But I love some instrumental, tunes that haven't been overdone. And it was really kind of exciting to choose songs. There's 6 of them on the album that, that were originally instrumentals and have then later had lyrics written for them. So I just want people to see an approach, to presenting, that music. I mean, that's probably one of my biggest goals. But also, my other big, I guess, one of the main reasons also I wanted to record was I really wanted to record the people that I was working with in New York for the most part, and people that I have close sort of personal connections with. So it was a bringing together of my jazz community and my jazz friends that I have been, working with, like Art Hirahara and Sam Bevan. I've known Sam for a really long time. We played together a lot in the Bay Area, and then he moved to New York and was able to write the beautiful arrangements, for me. So I really kind of wanted to also introduce him as a really spectacular arranger, as well as virtuosic, bass player. So he's a really close, and he's also my co-producer. So I guess I wanted to celebrate the relationships, my musical, relationships that I have, and present something that, really came from an organic, process. We workshopped all of the tunes in performance, for a few years before we went into the studio. And back in the old days, because we used to, be able to, play, like almost every single night, of course, and then just go into the studio and, kind of like make things happen. But that doesn't happen so much anymore, especially for a jazz vocalist. So the gigs, and of course for COVID, the gigs have really dried up. One of my favorite venues in New York has completely gone away, and that was Jazz at Catano. But a lot of other great venues have closed. And so it makes it harder to get out and really perform. And performing is what actually really hones a jazz musician's style and chops. I mean, you can practice, to your blue in the face, and of course that helps. But unless you're actually playing with other people, you're not really interacting. You're not really creating the jazz language, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I'm curious, how did this jazz journey begin for you? Where were you born and raised, and how did it all start?
Oh, okay. It's actually kind of like a little bit of a fun story. A couple of things. When I was a little girl, very little, I mean, I was probably 10, 11, 12, around that age, I would listen to the radio sometimes when I went to sleep at night in Maine. And I found this really cool AM radio station, WNEW. And it was broadcasting from New York, but we could get it clear as a bell in Fulton, Maine. Don't ask me how that happened. But I would fall asleep every single night listening to WNEW. And of course, it doesn't exist anymore as a radio station, as a brick and mortar radio station, but it actually has an online presence. And what's really sweet is there is, within that online presence, there's somebody that so there's somebody that plays my music on the online WNEW, which is for me this wonderful like little circle, of like, okay, I started listening to this great station when I was a kid, and now somebody's actually playing my music, and I get to hear the WNEW when they,
awesome.
when they're doing, it's really super awesome for me. So the other thing that really helped, kind of like get me interested in jazz was I was always, interested in being a singer. I loved, early rock and roll, and I grew up listening to Queen and Linda Ronstadt, who was my absolute favorite singer in the world. And my dad knew that I really loved, to sing. And he said, you know what, maybe we can get you a job, because he knew somebody who had a top 40 band. And so I auditioned for this top 40 band when I was 15. I had just started taking voice lessons and classical voice lessons. But I auditioned for this band, and we started to play. It's called Ram and Company. And we started to play every single weekend throughout the summer. So it was my very first summer job that I ever had. And so I learned a lot of really great songs by, Linda Ronstadt and, Tony Tennille, the Captain and Tennille, and the Carpenters. I mean, this is the kind of music I was singing, singing from the 70s and the early 80s, and, that's kind of, what I was doing. But somebody came to play with us one New Year's Eve. We had a New Year's Eve gig. And someone came to play with us who was a wonderful jazz flautist. Her name is Barbara London, and she also was from Fulton, Maine. Barbara isn't terribly known now, but she had like a little kind of career, sort of like a mini jazz career that really blossomed in, I would say, the late 70s and early 80s. And then she decided New York was really not for her, and so she came back to Maine. And I heard her, and she did these beautiful jazz standards, which were just, gorgeous. And I fell in love with music from, like the 30s and the 40s. And also at the same time, I had done, or very close to the same time, I had done a classical vocal competition, and I'd come in second in the state of Maine. So it was kind of a big deal for me. I had a picture in the newspaper, and I won $50, which I put toward fry boots, because I thought they were really cool at the time. My dad said, you're not, congratulations, but I'm not really going to be that impressed with you until you can do this. And he sat me down because he knew I was starting to get interested in jazz, and he played me Ella Fitzgerald. And I'd never really heard her scat before, and I was completely blown away. And I said to myself internally, I'm not going to rest until I know how to do that. And back in those days, there were no jazz vocal programs at universities. So I taught myself how to scat because I read that Charlie Parker had created bebop, essentially, by Kansas City guy, right? He had created bebop really by listening to Lester Young and really kind of speeding up Lester Young solos. And I thought, well, that's cool. If Charlie Parker can learn, to play better by listening, to records, I can do the same thing with Ella, right? And so I memorized Ella Fitzgerald solos when I was very young. So that's kind of what taught me how to, and then of course now I know what Ella was doing because I can sit down and I can analyze it. But in those days, I was doing everything purely by ear, which I still really, I love, relying on my ear, but I do actually have, music theory knowledge to kind of back everything up, which is pretty cool. But that's how I started. And then when I was in college, I had an opportunity to audition for a professional big band, which was really kind of remarkable in those days. Once again, this was the late 70s, early 80s. So I was an 18-year-old, singer, with a professional big band. I had no concept, of how to go about doing this. So I would read everybody's biography that I could get my hands on, like Doris Day, for example. And it was a wonderful education, learning, how to sing with a big band. And even though this was in New Hampshire, I went to school at the University of New Hampshire in Durham, New Hampshire. And even though this was in New Hampshire, the gentleman that ran the big band, his name is Clayton Poole, he still has a big band. And he would bring people up from Boston. So we had like the best, jazz musicians in New England, playing with our band. And the band was absolutely smoking as a big band. And actually it still is. It's a really, really great band. And I feel really honored that I was able to take part in it. And I met my now ex-husband in the band, who's a saxophone player. He and I, got married and started our own band, which was a smaller band. And then we toured all around New England. We got accepted into the New England Touring Arts program. And I even was able to go to something called Jazz in July as a very young woman, which is in Amherst, Massachusetts. And this is a wonderful big jazz workshop, that Billy Taylor and Max Roach and people, like that, were associated with. And I got to open for them. And I got to play in Boston quite a bit. I went through a very messy divorce. And then I ended up on the West Coast and, kind of laid low for a few years. And this is in my late 20s and early 30s. And I got I got an improvised music studies master's degree. And then I moved to San Francisco, and I started to play in San Francisco after a few years of, managing a bookstore. But I got back into music pretty quickly. So after San Francisco, I'm giving you the really, very quick and dirty, version. After San Francisco kind of dried up in terms of music, which it did in around 2008, I moved back to the East Coast to be closer to my family. And I thought, there's only one place in the world that jazz is still going to be, no matter what, and that's New York City. So, it's hard to establish yourself here, as you can well imagine. But I've been very fortunate and had some wonderful musical opportunities. And I'm hoping that this album, will bring me some more. So that's the very quick version.
Yeah, I like it. So, over your life, you've been able to be around some heavy hitters and veterans in the world of jazz. What did you learn from them that you, in turn, have used players that you get around?
Wow, that's a really good question. What have I learned from them? To respect the music and respect the musicians, that are the bearers, of the tradition. And even though I consider myself, I'm pretty much of a traditional, jazz singer, but I like something that's a little cutting edge. So, the people that I respected were always trying to bring the music forward and yet respect its roots at the same time. So not being like what's the word I want? Somebody who was a cookie cutter, or trad jazz. Not that I have any problems with that, and I respect it very much. But for me, that always seems like you're kind of like kind of like moving backwards, and you're not really trying to push your own limits and push because an artist to me is somebody who's really trying to push their own limits. I pushed my own limits really hard on this album, and I trained like an athlete, to do it. Because it was with COVID, during COVID, and I didn't have a lot of gigs, so I had to I practiced 2 hours a day for like months. I really did, in order to, to try to do my best. And that actually, I think, is really kind of a legacy from, the people that I truly respect. You have to respect the music enough to always give your very, very best on every gig. And in every situation. And you have to push yourself. You can't just kind of like, rest on your laurels, so to speak. You have to be kind of like a forward thinker. And so people like Max Roach, who I had a bit of a relationship with as a friend, was somebody that was very inspiring to talk to. And those are the kinds of things that he talked about. And Billy Taylor, same thing. The people that, I grew up listening to, I read about. Because, I come from an academic family. Everybody in my family has PhDs except me. I have a lowly master's degree. So, but I read voraciously on people's lives. And I went and I hung out at sessions. And this is something that you do. It's almost like going into the dojo, where you've got all of these incredible, masters who do, martial arts. You have to always go to the dojo as a jazz musician. You have to go and you have to listen to people. You have to get into the action. You can't really let up on that. And I have cycles. Sometimes I go more often than others. But unless you're going in and you're meeting people and you're getting into the scene, because jazz is really a very community oriented thing even now. And especially so in New York City. And unless you're in the scene and you're working the scene, so to speak, and you get in there and you sit in with people and give it your best shot every single time. Unless you're doing that, you're not really participating in the culture of jazz. And so I guess if I had to boil it down, I would say that the people that have been my mentors have instilled in me a desire to continue to participate in the real culture of jazz and to try to, in my own way, be as cutting edge as I can in my own life. And once again, I don't consider myself an innovator or anything, but I'm always striving to always be striving to respect, the past, especially the masters, and to give it your all.
So what do you like the best about being a professional musician? I mean, there's so many facets to go into it, and I'm just curious, what's the greatest part every day waking up doing this?
Well, being a professional musician means that I get to share my experience of music, with others on a fairly regular basis, and that to me is a gift. It's a gift, for me to experience performing, especially now, having moved to New York City, singing with like the best musicians in the world. And that's also humbling and mind blowing and wow. That's an amazing gift, but also to be able to gift the experience of that and singing with other people. And so it's that kind of like it's that symbiotic relationship, between your audience, and the people performing. So that's the most important and powerful thing, I think. And I think that every musician, who really gets it, that's really what it's about. It's the sharing of the musical experience, and it's not about, okay, I'm so great and I'm going to just in other words, it's not an ego thing. It's a sharing between it's a sharing of the musical performing experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's the thing from my end covering this, is that I find the jazz community to be one of the best groups of people that I've ever been around, ever. Like, talk to.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, and it's like the higher up the food chain you go, the more humble and wise and grounded they tend to be. So no, I totally get that. So let me ask you this: if you could go back. If you have a dream tonight, you run into your younger version of yourself around the time that you were trying to go out to pursue this dream and be a professional, and you could give that version a piece of advice based on the wisdom that you've accumulated over these years, what would you say to your younger version?
Oh, my younger version. Well, I was in New York in 1988. I would sit down with that version of me, and I would say, listen, you're going to regret moving to the West Coast. In a way, you're going to regret it. But you should move anyway, because you're going to meet people, who are very dear and wonderful friends that you'd never meet otherwise. And, the experience there is going to shape you in a way that staying in New York will not do. And so, there's a part of me that really wishes I had just stayed here. I'd still be in my rent-stabilized apartment, on the Lower East Side, and I would be, probably maybe a little further ahead in my jazz game. I would tell my person, I would tell myself, tell myself, you're gonna get your heart broken, and it's gonna hurt like hell, but you're gonna go through that experience, and that experience is gonna be ultimately good for you because it's gonna make you a better singer. So don't shy away from all of those experiences that are going to be, earth-shakingly painful for you, because you're going to come out the other side and it's going to be okay. And so I guess that's what I would sit down and tell, the younger version of myself, because I can see her now, and, she's trying to make that decision. Should I stay or should I go? And, I'm telling her, nope, you should go. Because if you don't go, you're going to miss, meeting some people, that, are still, your best friends in the world. And that's ultimately the most important thing is your relationships with other people.
So at this point in your career, what are you the proudest of? What do you sit back and think, wow, that happened?
Well, I think I'm the proudest of this album because, I really wanted to produce something that I felt that was the quality of, something that somebody, who, like, say, has a major recording contract could do. And I wanted something to sound classic and yet, like I said, a little cutting edge at the same time. And I wanted to be able to sing my own original music and also celebrate original music of others, who I really, love and appreciate. And I guess I'm most proud of this album.
If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see anybody perform live, I think I might know the answer to this, but I never like to assume. Where are you going? Who are you going to see?
Billie Holiday. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't expect that.
Yeah. Who did you think?
I thought Ella.
I've seen Ella. I was very lucky. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you were.
When I was very, very young, I was still a teenager. I went to Boston, and I saw Ella perform live. And it was amazing. And it was like I said, it was in Boston. It was Symphony Hall in Boston. There was hardly anybody there. It was crazy. And so at the end of her set, I was able to get backstage. There was no line to go see her. And I was able to go and to talk with her. And you know how they say your knees knock when you're and that's an old, like trope, like, oh yeah, my knees knocked together. My knees were knocking together because I was so nervous. I was shaking all over because she was the closest thing to God that I had ever been, ever seen. But she was incredibly humble and sweet, and she gave me an autographed picture. It was a wonderful moment, and she was spectacular. I mean, this is like 1979, 1980, and she was still really at, the top of her game. She sounded spectacular. But no, I would go back in time to see Billie, because for me, Billie is the first true jazz singer. That her ability to phrase behind the beat gave freedom, to her own interpretation of a song, and so it freed the song up from, the written, I'm sorry, I'm very noisy in the neighborhood, the written notes on the page, and gave her the opportunity to start telling a story, with the song in a way that nobody really had done previously, not even Louis Armstrong. So to me, Billie is, the prime, the first person to really do that. And so many other people, took their inspiration from her. Frank Sinatra felt that she was his guru, and he would go and he would listen to her as often as he could to absorb, what she was doing with her style. He didn't try to copy her, but he allowed that freedom of interpretation, to come into his own song style, and it was directly related to what, Billie Holiday was doing. So that's why I would go see Billie.
So why do you love jazz?
Well, I love jazz because of that freedom, because it is, like the ultimate, freedom of expression. And yet, in my opinion, you have to really understand the underpinnings of the music too, in order to be able to freely create. So it's like you have to understand the parameters there first, and then you need to be able to dance within those parameters. But it gives you a remarkable amount of freedom and an ability, to really develop your own sort of personal style like no other. I don't think like any other, form of music. I mean, you can say that rock does the same to a certain extent, or that people that are singers or songwriters, but everybody sounds cookie cutter to me now. When I hear, when I hear new bands, come up, I hear a lot of formulaic, stuff going on in pop music. And jazz, while it does have its formulas, it's never really truly formulaic unless you're doing one of those, kind of like, older styles, unless you're trying to, sound exactly like Billie Holiday and you have one of those, bands that are doing a very, very, kind of like, little spotlight in time, kind of a style. Jazz requires you, I think, this is my own, what's the word I want? It's my own ideal. My own ideal is that jazz requires you to find your own style and to find your own ability to interpret, interpret a song. And I love that challenge.
So everyone has a perception of you, an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. Who do you think you are?
Who do I think I am? Well, I'm somebody who's never given up, even when people have, really tried to make me give up. And I can say that there are people in the jazz world, while I've had some great experiences with greats in the jazz world, I've had some really crummy experiences too. And I was, at one point in my career, without going into detail, really discouraged from continuing as a jazz vocalist. At that point, I was at kind of like a crossroads. And I thought, okay, I can give up. I can, and I was really tempted to, it was a crushing experience. Or I can find a way back. And I found a way back. I found a way back through my community, I have to say, who were very, very supportive of me as fellow musicians. But I would say I'm somebody who never gives up.
Beautiful. Hey, thank you for opening up today. Thank you for taking some time out to open up about your life and music, the new album. Good luck with everything as we move forward.
Very excited. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate, the opportunity, to share my life experience, but also, to share, a conversation with you about all of this. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest singers in Boston, New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Vicki for her time, energy, and class. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for all things Neon Jazz, the neonjazz.blogspot.com. And you can also go to joedomino.com, and there you can kick in via PayPal or Patreon. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
And gone is the boy.
Neon Jazz.